The Last Robber. Part 1. A Desperate Man. Billy McTavish never thought he would rob a bank. For 35 years, he was a hard-working builder, his hands calloused from bricks and mortar, his heart full of warmth for his 2 young children. He had never broken a traffic law, never cheated on his taxes, never taken anything that wasn't his dot until the storm named medulloblastoma hit his 5-year-old son, Finn. For 3 months now, Billy's world had shrunk to the white walls of Great Ormond Street Hospital. Finn lay there, his soft blonde hair now completely gone, his chubby face thin and gaunt. Tangled tubes connected his small body to beeping machines, the only sound in the room through endless nights. The hospital bills kept piling up. Insurance claim rejections stacked up like an invisible wall, trapping all his hope. The doctor mentioned an experimental treatment in the US. High success rate. But the cost? £250,000. Billy sold the small suburban house. He borrowed from everywhere. Friends, colleagues, old acquaintances. Sarah, his wife, had tirelessly contacted charities, knocked on every donation office door. They only managed to raise £50,000. They still needed £200,000. The night before he decided to do the unthinkable, Billy sat by Finn's bedside. The boy was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling weakly under the thin blanket. Outside, London City Hall sparkled with colourful lights, but to Billy, the whole city was just a mass of grey concrete. He looked at his son, then out the window at the distant blinking lights of skyscrapers, and in his mind, a crazy idea began to form. The Thames and Mercantile Bank, Leadenhall Street. He had worked on a construction site opposite it for 6 months. He knew that building. He knew the ventilation system, the hot air ducts, even the weekly maintenance schedule. He knew because he was a builder, and builders see buildings differently. They see what's hidden behind the plasterboard, what flows within the walls. He walked out of the hospital door, stepping into a day he knew would change his life forever. Part 2. The Perfect Heist. 8 a.m. The Thames and Mercantile Bank on Leadenhall Street started its new day. Office workers queued to deposit money. Elderly people came to withdraw pensions. Young mothers held their babies. Normal life was unfolding. 8:47 a.m. A man in an orange protective suit walked into the lobby. He wore a hard hat and safety goggles, carrying a heavy toolbox. No one looked at him. A builder was a familiar sight in this constantly developing city. Billy McTavish walked straight towards the large limestone wall in the corner of the lobby. He placed a maintenance in progress sign next to the wall, spread a dust sheet, and began working. His hands were shaking. For the first time in his life, Billy McTavish's hands shook when he held a drill. He had held a drill thousands of times, but never like this. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Finn's face appeared in his mind. Those clear blue eyes, his toothless smile, his weak voice. "Dad, I'm so tired." His eyes stung. He opened them, gripping the handle tightly. His hands stopped shaking. He drilled. Precisely. Slowly. The drill bit went exactly where he had calculated after days of studying the building's blueprints. He knew how thick the plaster was. He knew the hot air duct system was behind it. He knew that drilling into that duct would trigger the heat sensors and set off the fire alarm. But he didn't just trigger the fire alarm. He also threaded a thin steel cable into the drilled hole. A cable he had made from car windshield wipers, filed down over 3 nights in the bathroom so Sarah wouldn't see. The cable's end had a small hook, bent like a fish hook. He threaded, hooked, and pulled. He listened dot, and then colon click. Dot, a dry sound echoed from deep within the wall. The faint sound of a safe hinge moving. Immediately, the bank's sensor system activated. But instead of a burglary alarm, it registered a duct system error. And just as Billy had calculated, fire alarms began blaring throughout the building. The bank lobby descended into chaos. Screaming, people running frantically, water spraying from the fire suppression system like rain. Billy waited. He waited until the crowd surged outside, until the security guard ran to help with the evacuation, until he was alone in the white haze of WaterDOT, and then he did what no one expected. He didn't run out. He ran in. Through the water, through the faint smoke from the alarm system, Billy rushed to the teller counter. The door to the vault area, usually locked, was wide open, abandoned by panicked staff. Billy rushed in, and he stood before the emergency cash drawer dot in every major bank. There's an emergency cash drawer for special transactions, preloaded with a certain amount of cash. Billy had researched it. The drawer was right under the teller counter, protected only by thin steel and a simple mechanical lock. During peak hours, it was often open for staff to get cash for large customers. Billy knelt down, his hands still shaking but precise. He drilled into the lock. The drill whined shrilly in the empty space. But outside, the fire alarm still screamed, and fire truck sirens wailed in the distance. No one heard his drilling. The lock popped. Billy opened the small door, and before him were stacks of money. Pounds. Blue. Purple. Neatly piled. Billy's heart stopped. He reached out, but his hand shook again. For the second time that day, the builder's calloused hands trembled. Not from fear of being caught. Not from fear of prison. But because he was holding his son's life in his hands. He took the canvas bag from his toolbox and started stuffing money inside. Stack 1, stack 2, stack 3. His hands trembled, but he folded the money quickly. Only one number occupied his mind. 250,000. Enough to save Finn. Enough for his son to live. When he reached the 25th stack, he stopped. Exactly £250,000. Billy looked at the money in his bag, then at the remaining stacks in the drawer. There was plenty left. Hundreds of thousands more. He could take more. He could take it all. He could never worry about money again. But he didn't. Billy McTavish had never been a thief. Today, he had become a robber, but he was still not a greedy man. He took only what he needed. Enough to save his son. Not a penny more. He closed the drawer, stuffed the money bag into his toolbox, and ran outside into the evacuating crowd. Water still sprayed, smoke still hung in the air. Alarms still blared across Leadenhall Street. Billy ran, running through the chaotic crowd, stripping off his protective suit as he went, revealing a plain grey sweater underneath. He dumped the suit in a public trash can, hid the money bag under his jacket, and melted into the crowd on the tube. As the train pulled away, Billy sat huddled in a corner of the carriage, clutching the money bag to his chest. A woman sitting nearby looked at him with concern. "Are you all right? You're shaking terribly." Billy looked down at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. "I'm fine," he whispered. "Just worried about my son." The woman didn't understand, just smiled and looked away. But Billy held the bag tighter, closed his eyes, and for the first time in months he felt he could breathe. £250,000. Enough to save Finn. Part 3. Inspector Daniel Park. The crime scene map was spread across Inspector Daniel Park's desk, but his eyes weren't on the red circles marking the emergency exits. His gaze was fixed on his computer screen, where a figure in an orange protective suit was calmly drilling into the limestone wall, slowly, precisely, like a surgeon opening a patient's chest. The video was replayed for the 7th time. See that? Daniel turned to his young assistant, Detective Marcus Webb. He never looks around. No glances left or right. A professional bank robber would always watch the cameras, the guards, the exits. But this guy only looks at the wall. And an amateur knows the hot air ducts run under the vault floor. Daniel flipped through the building's technical document. Blueprints yellowed from 30 years ago. He knew that safe was installed in 1995. He knew the ventilation was renovated in 2008. And he knew that in winter, when the central heating runs at full capacity, the hot air would thin the lubricating oil on the hinges. He zoomed in on a frame, pointing at the man's hand holding the drill. Look closely. He doesn't hold the drill like a laborer. He holds it like someone who's held a welding torch, chiseled bricks, spread mortar. Those fingers have worked thousands of hours in London's rain and sun. He's a builder. A real builder. The fingerprints on the drill handle were sent for analysis. Results came back in 2 hours. William Billy McTavish, 35, builder, no criminal record, residing in a modest boarding house in the East End. Almost too easy, Marcus muttered. A trap? Maybe not. We need to check it out in person. The silver police car glided through London's streets as night fell. They stopped before an old boarding house, laundry lines crisscrossing between balconies. Children's cries echoing from dimly lit windows. They knocked on apartment number 12. A young woman opened the door, eyes red-rimmed, flour still on her apron. From inside came the sound of a child's hacking cough. Sorry to bother you. We're looking for Billy McTavish. He's not here, the woman said, her voice tired. He's at the hospital with our son. What's this about? Has Billy done something wrong? Daniel hesitated. You are his wife, Sarah McTavish. He looked into the woman's eyes. There was no deceit there, only worry and exhaustion. In Daniel's chest, a strange feeling stirred. Nothing serious, he said, his voice softening. We just need to verify some information. What's wrong with your son? Sarah McTavish hugged her arms tightly, as if trying to keep herself from collapsing. Medulloblastoma. Terminal stage. The doctor mentioned an experimental treatment in the US, but it costs £250,000. We've borrowed from everywhere, sold our house, but we're still short. Her voice broke. Daniel was silent. The number echoed in his mind. £250,000. Exactly enough to save a life. The amount Billy McTavish, the builder with no record, had taken without taking a single penny more from the bank's safe. We won't disturb you further, Daniel said, pulling out a business card and handing it to Sarah. If Billy comes home, ask him to call me. Anytime. They left the boarding house in silence. As the car pulled back onto the street, Marcus couldn't help asking, Inspector, we have enough evidence to arrest him. Why didn't we? Because I want to understand, Daniel interrupted. I want to understand why a man who never committed a crime suddenly drills a hole in a bank wall. I want to understand why he took exactly £250,000, not a penny more. And most of all, I want to look him in the eye before I make a final judgment. Part 4. A Father's Eyes. Great Ormond Street Hospital was lit up all night. Standing at a distance through the glass door of the special care unit, Daniel saw Billy McTavish. The man in the orange protective suit from the video now wore an old grey sweater, his head slightly bowed, his calloused hand gripping the tiny hand of his son. The boy lay in the hospital bed, his head shaved, tangled tubes like chains binding his fragile life to the treatment machines. Daniel stood there for a long time. He watched Billy whisper something to his son, saw the boy smile weakly, saw the father lean down to kiss his forehead. And he saw, when Billy looked up, the eyes of a man who had stared into the abyss of despair and refused to let go. A nurse passed by, and Daniel stopped her, showing his badge. "How is this case progressing?" The nurse sighed. "Poor little guy. Needs that experimental treatment in the US. £250,000. The family has borrowed everywhere, sold their house, but they're still short. They're trying to raise funds from the community." Daniel nodded thanks, then turned back to look through the glass. In his mind, the final pieces began to click into place. The hole in the wall. The fire alarm. The chaos. 250,000. Not a penny more. And he understood. Billy McTavish didn't rob a bank out of greed. Billy McTavish robbed a bank out of desperation. He wasn't a criminal. He was just a father trying to save his child with everything he had, even if it meant sacrificing his own freedom. Daniel stood there, watching the man on the other side of the glass, and he remembered his own mother. She had also died of cancer 20 years ago, when Daniel was just a 15-year-old boy. Back then, he had been just as desperate as Billy was now. He had wished he could do anything to save her. But he couldn't do anything. Billy, though, had done something. He had done something wrong, but for the rightest reason in the world. Daniel Park turned and walked away. In his heart, a decision had formed. Part 5. The Final Verdict. That night, Daniel Park sat alone in his office, the case file open before him. The final report he was about to write could end his career if he was wrong, or end a child's life if he was right. He looked at the clock. 2 a.m. Across the city, a father was keeping vigil by his son's bedside. Across the world, a research institute was waiting for funds to save that child. And right in front of him, a pen waited to be picked up to write a verdict. Daniel Park picked up the pen, and he began to write. Preliminary investigation conclusion regarding the incident at Thames and Mercantile Bank on November 15th. After thorough examination of the scene, analysis of security camera footage, and technical evidence, we find no indication of intentional criminal activity. The drilled hole in the wall has been identified as resulting from electrical maintenance work by a subcontractor, unrelated to any attempt to access the safe. The fire alarm activation was caused by a technical fault in a defective heat sensor. No bank assets were lost or damaged. Recommendation. Case closed. He signed it, stamped it, and placed the file in a locked drawer. On his way home at dawn, he stopped at an ATM and transferred £5,000 to the Fight with Finn fund with a brief note. From someone who also lost their mother to this cruel disease. But Daniel didn't know he wasn't the only one. In the days that followed, the Fight with Finn donation page suddenly received a flood of anonymous donations. £10,000 from one account. £20,000 from another. Some notes said, "Stay strong, little warrior." Some left just a line, "I'm a father too." Sarah McTavish didn't understand what was happening. She only knew that each day when she opened the donation page, the number increased. 50,000. 100,000. 150,000. And on a Monday morning, when she opened the website, the number displayed £250,000. Sarah burst into tears. She ran into the hospital room, throwing on her arms around Billy, who sat by Finn's bedside with dark circles under his eyes. "We have enough, Billy. We have enough money. Someone donated enough." Billy froze. He looked at his wife, then at his son, then at the ceiling as if unable to believe what he'd just heard. Inside him, emotions erupted, but mixed with happiness was a vague fear. Who had donated? And why? He didn't know that the story of the strange robbery on Leadenhall Street had spread through police circles. Unofficially, not publicly, but like a whispered story among those who still had a heart. And many of them, inspectors, detectives, administrative staff, had quietly transferred money to the Fight with Finn Fund. They didn't know Billy McTavish. They didn't know what he had done. But they knew that a child needed to be saved. And that was enough. Part 6. Light at the end of the tunnel. 6 months later, Regent's Park was bathed in spring sunshine. Golden daffodils lined the paths. Trees were sprouting fresh green leaves. On the lush green grass, a little boy was running. Finn McTavish, now 5.5, his hair grown back in soft chestnut curls, was chasing a red ball. His tiny legs ran back and forth, his laughter ringing clear across the open space. Sarah sat on a bench, her eyes glistening as she watched him. Beside her, Billy sat quietly, still holding his wife's hand, his eyes following their son's every step. The experimental treatment in America had been successful. The doctors said Finn was completely cured. The boy would live a normal life, grow up, go to school, fall in love, laugh, do all the things that 6 months ago seemed impossible. Billy watched his son, and a complex feeling rose in his heart. He still remembered that fateful day clearly. The day his hands shook holding the drill. The day he stuffed stacks of money into a canvas bag. The day he became a robber to save his child. He had never told Sarah the truth. He didn't dare. But every night, lying beside her in the darkness, he wondered, would the past one day come knocking? Would someone come and take it all away? Today, as Finn ran across the grass, a man approached the bench. He wore a grey overcoat and a fedora, walking slowly. Billy looked up, and his heart stopped. The man stopped in front of him. Their eyes met. A long silence. "Are you?" Billy began, his voice hoarse. "I'm Inspector Daniel Park," the man said, his voice warm and deep. "I investigated the incident at Thames and Mercantile Bank 6 months ago." Sarah turned to look at her husband, eyes wide. Billy paled. He stood up, instinctively pulling Sarah behind him, as if shielding her from something terrible about to happen. "Inspector," Billy said, his voice trembling. I can explain." Daniel Park raised a hand, stopping him. He smiled, a gentle smile with no threat at all. "No need to explain, Mr. McTavish." He looked towards Finn, still running and playing on the grass.